Hello, Collateral Gaming listeners. Chazzle Dazzle here from the Trial by Error Variety Show podcast. I just wanted to take a few seconds to invite you guys over to what we do. No, it's not video games, but we do invite really awesome and unique bands from all over the world. We dig deep into their souls and find really cool stories to tell you, and there's tons of music every week, so subscribe to us wherever you subscribe to your podcast. We look forward to having you.
I'm Ashley Chancellor.
I'm Megan Gardner.
And I'm Alan Gomez.
This is Collateral Gaming. Welcome to Collateral Gaming, the only video game podcast that matters, where we focus on good games, bad games, and everything else in between in the world of gaming. We are podcasting straight from San Antonio, Texas, and yes, my friends, we are a 420 friendly podcast. So whatever you have, smoke it if you've got it. Well, we're practicing social distancing again, right, guys?
Yeah, we got a lockdown again here in Texas.
Mm-hmm.
We have to wear masks everywhere we go, or it's a fine.
It's a statewide mandate, and I mean, honestly, if that encourages everyone to stay home, and if everyone's wearing a mask when they go out, maybe that'll be for the better. Hopefully we can get through with this pretty soon, but we decided to go ahead and Skype this in again. So again, apologies for the bad audio. I mean, it's just something we're just gonna have to deal with, but we're here. We're a little bit delayed from when we originally wanted to release this episode, just because of events in our personal lives, COVID, things like that. But we're super stoked to talk about it. We've been playing this game for the past month, and I think I've been having a lot of fun with it. How about you guys?
Oh yeah, it brings back a total sense of childhood. Our diet has changed from healthy food to chicken nuggets and mac and cheese.
Yeah, it's definitely nostalgic.
Yeah, no, it is. Went straight into childhood.
It definitely looks a lot better than it did back then, though.
Like we knew any better. But...
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about Spyro Reignited Trilogy. Before we get into that, though, we're going to do our our episodic Collateral Gaming news. Boop. All right. So, first off, The Last of Us Part 2 was released, right?
Yeah.
That was a pretty big deal. In fact, there were a lot of people that, even before the game came out, when the leaks were out, there were a lot of people that had a criticism for the direction that the story went in. Now, I haven't started playing the game yet, and I don't really know much, but there's a lot of people that are actually genuinely disliking the game, but then you're also seeing a lot of people that really, really love it. So it's just kind of a binary.
Yeah. We were with some of our friends last weekend on the 4th of July, and we had one friend that really, really enjoyed it and loved the storyline, thought it was a great progression for Ellie and her own progression, I guess, through the game, because it's more focused on her from what I understand. And then we had another friend who just hated it, didn't want to talk about it. He was like, it was stupid. And I was like, don't talk about it around me because I haven't played it yet. But it was either great received or poor received. I haven't gotten anything in the middle from feedback from friends that have bought it. So
yeah, I've heard that love it or hated it, at the end you're gonna cry regardless.
Yeah, which I mean the first one already made me cry, so I'm expecting the headache post cry.
Falling like a school child.
I mean, I think that's pretty powerful. A game that makes you cry. I mean, that's something. I'm excited to play it. In fact, we're going to be. We'll go ahead and announce that, I guess. We will be talking about that next season because, I mean, there was no way we couldn't jump on that train. And I think just with the controversy, it's going to be a fun game to talk about. Now, another thing that happened recently was since our last episode, but not so recently, at the time of this recording, but The PS5 console design and several titles were announced, including some exclusives. There was that live stream event. It was really exciting. There were some really, really, really cool new games that were announced, including my favorite from the pick was Spider-Man Miles Morales. As a huge fan of Spider-Man PS4, a game like The Last of Us, both of those we've done on the podcast before. We may not be doing Miles Morales as an actual episode, but definitely want to talk about it. Maybe do either a Let's Play or a bonus round on that. I want to incorporate that somehow into next season. Because I was just floored away by Spider-Man PS4, and I'm super excited about what has been described as a standalone spin-off, or say it's its own game. It's not just an expansion, but it's also not Spider-Man 2. It's just kind of its own side story, not unlike Uncharted: The Lost Legacy. That's what it's being compared to. Now, I know there was one particular title that you were pretty excited about, right, Megan?
I can't wait because they have released the name of the next Horizon game. It's going to be Horizon Forbidden West. So they're going to go, I guess, out past where the Outlands are into a different part of the world, and there's different machines, and you might be able to actually battle Palmex. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm so excited.
Fun. It looks really fun.
The trailer, like, I'm in a fan group, and they are literally all just, like, blown away by just the graphics from the trailer alone. So, and I mean, the first game itself was already so gorgeous. Like, I'm like, yes!
Yeah, no, the first game was amazing. And I was really, really, really blown away by it, and I'm excited for the sequel as well. I didn't play all the way through Horizon Zero Dawn, but I did play quite a ways in. I'd like to finish that at some point. Hint, hint. And also, the trailer for Forbidden West looks really, really, really cool. That little teaser trailer. I believe they also announced Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart. Yeah, I guess Insomniac is working overtime if they're doing both Spider-Man and Ratchet and Clank. Or I don't know if Insomniac is still doing.
I heard that they grew the company just for these two projects. Like, they just were like, all right, guys, the fans want more stuff. We got to make more team members. Like, can't blame them. They're a really good producer of games. So, same thing with Guerrilla Games. I mean, they hired a whole new team. Like, I remember watching through, and like they had so many job listings for they're not going past Horizon. They're going to start making a lot more intensive games, and they want to do a lot more independent titles other than Horizon. Which, I mean, compared to their last first-person shooters, it was like the Walmart version of COD. I'm hoping it's a little bit better.
Well, Naughty Dog's been working overtime too. The Last of Us Part 2, and then now another Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, there's another Crash Bandicoot coming out as well.
Crash Bandicoot 4. It's about time. Which is kind of a pun there. You know, it's about time for Crash Bandicoot 4, even though technically we did have a Crash Bandicoot 4. Yeah. But I think people like to forget about it, like people like to forget about Spyro 4, which we'll talk about that. We'll talk more about Insomniac Games as well, because they're the developers behind the original Spyro trilogy. But yes, Crash 4, I'm super stoked about. I know the Crash Bandicoot Insane trilogy was kind of what launched the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. In fact, Insomniac and Naughty Dog are, kind of have a very friendly rivalry or friendship, actually, kinship between them. There's more to that story, which we'll get into when we talk about the development history here. But yeah, I'm really impressed by all these developers and the love and care that they put into their games. Another title that was announced for the PS5, but not an exclusive, was Resident Evil Village. That looks pretty cool.
Yes. Yeah. And what I heard about that one is it's not Resident Evil 8. It's going to be its own independent thing. So it's different than...
Same universe, just different characters.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, what is it, the one that you were talking about where they're all connected, where it's horror movie?
Oh, like The Conjuring and Annabelle and all that stuff. Yeah. Same universe, different characters.
That is actually really exciting. I didn't know that. But, I mean, I've never really got into the Resident Evil games. I've played a little bit of them here and there, but I'd like to. I mean, I know the series, has been critically acclaimed. I mean, obviously it's gotten so many games in the series for a reason.
Oh, yeah, no, it's a fantastic series. It's really good.
The last one I played was Resident Evil 5 on the 360, and it was okay. I just didn't like the mechanics of, like, you couldn't walk and shoot at the same time. You had to, like, if you wanted to run, you run, stop, aim, shoot, run, stop. Like, you couldn't shoot and move and walk
weird.
at the same time.
Huh.
It's just like, I'm sure they did that for a reason, because they don't want you just blowing through zombies. They got to make it somewhat of a...
I mean, I guess, that kind of forces you to play a certain way. That's interesting. One piece of news that is actually of interest to me, as someone who, in high school was kind of part of the skater crowd, was Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2 are going to be remastered. That's pretty cool, but that's not exciting for me as Skate 4, which Tony Hawk is great. I mean, but EA Skate is the objectively superior series. I mean, there's just no way around it. The controls are more realistic. And they feel more like skateboarding. And there's just something about, the freedom that you have with Skate that I really enjoyed. And, the last game we had was Skate 3, which was on the 360 and PS3. So, I mean, it skipped an entire generation. But Skate 4 is in development. And Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1 and 2, which are beloved favorites from fans, are being remastered.
Oh yeah, it makes me wonder if Tony Hawk's going to make a cameo in it again.
It's the same game as the first two, right? It's just being remastered. So.
Yeah, well, I know like with some remasters that have been coming out recently, like they change a little bit of the dynamic of the game, where they ask the voice actors to come back because there's just not recoverable data from the original engine to create the game and stuff. So I wonder if he's going to make his own new cameo, or like if he's going to joke about how, like, oh man, I just saw a guy that looks like Tony Hawk. Yeah, well, Tony Hawk.
I love his tweets, actually. They're great, yeah. But that's interesting that you said that, too, because, that kind of actually happened with the Spyro games, which are almost, in a sense, remakes, more so than they are remasters. But we'll get into that in a little bit here. Any other additions to Collateral Gaming news?
Not that I can think of. I mean, they've dropped all the specs and stuff like we discussed in the last episode on the new consoles. Those are supposed to be coming out later this year. We don't know if it's going to be delayed because COVID is spiking again. So we're not really sure what's going on. But regardless, that's probably going to be Christmas presents this year.
Yeah, I like how Sony and Microsoft are kind of just like
duking it out.
Kind of about the price. They're like, hey, you gonna release your price? No. Well, I'm not either then. And it's just a mystery.
It's like Step Brothers, but console edition.
Oh, you know what else? There's one new console that's not yet announced, but it's reported. It's rumored. And I think it's pretty definite at this point. Microsoft has yet to announce it, but the Xbox Series S, which is going to be like a lower cost version of the Xbox Series X. So they'll have, both a high tier and low tier console, which I think is interesting. I think that's actually a good dynamic to have. That's a good way to appeal to a wider demographic of gamers. And in fact, I agree. I'm probably going to invest in the PS5 first. And because of, money, it's going to be hard for me to get another console. But, if they have the Series S out, and for me, I mean, I'm not that big on specs. I mean, if I was big on specs, I'd be a PC gamer. So, I mean, specs don't matter to me. It's exclusives that matter to me. So, I would probably want to invest in the cheaper one. But yeah, no, that was a lot of news actually within the past month, and a lot of stuff to go over. A lot of really exciting new games and consoles coming out that during these troubling times, I mean, we're pretty stoked. I mean, when we've got COVID going on, and obviously we have, police brutality and minority suffering, and, there's just a lot of crazy shit in the world right now.
It's insanity. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, do I even want to step out of the house? Kind of just, it's insanity everywhere right now.
But I mean, the world of gaming has always kind of been a respite from that, It's been like our escape. I mean,
and escape reality.
Yeah, exactly. Escape reality. I that's what I've always loved about video games. It's just kind of like the whole fantasy. And what better game than Spyro to kind of really escape into? In fact, right now, I mean, I found myself really intrigued and really invested in the bright colors and the, just the fun, zany characters and the light tone was a really nice, distraction from reality for me. Playing a game like this, when we see a lot of more like gritty, serious titles and kind of moving back into what was more of a just a different era of gaming when things were different.
Yeah, simpler times.
Exactly. But the Spyro Reignited Trilogy, of course, is a remastered collection, or I want to say that they pretty much are full-on remakes, because I don't think they reused any of the original assets. Because even all the voice work was redone and all the models were redone, and man, the level of attention to detail, But yeah, it's the first 3 Spyro games, kind of the holy trilogy. I mean, after this, the Spyro series is kind of perceived as having gone downhill. These are the 3 games that were developed by Insomniac Games. Again, the developers behind Spider-Man, which we did an episode on, which we talked about earlier, but also the Ratchet and Clank series, the Resistance series, Sunset Overdrive. And Insomniac Games is now, as of recently, a subsidiary of Sony Interactive Entertainment. Originally, when we did our Spider-Man episode, we actually noted that Insomniac was one of the few Sony collaborators that wasn't actually owned by Sony. They were still an independent studio. But this is no longer true. They are actually part of Sony now, and all releases as of the launch of PS5 are actually going to be branded under PlayStation Studios.
Mm-hmm. It's kind of similar to what Xbox did and bought out all those indie developers, and now it's just under, I think it's Microsoft Games or something.
Are they doing the same thing?
I can't remember. They talked about it at E3 a couple years ago. They're doing a lot of similar stuff. They're trying to go into their... PlayStation is kind of pulling an Xbox move and going into kind of delving into the indie developers and trying to help them out and buy them out. So there's more games for the whole platform of gamers to see that they're being produced.
That's a good move. So. I mean, and with Insomniac joining Sony, I mean, I think that's a good move as well, because... essentially, they're going to have access to more resources, and they're going to be able to produce AAA games. But Insomniac is known for creating the Spyro series and also creating the Ratchet and Clank series. And the games that Insomniac did produce were very well received. The original Spyro trilogy that's being remade here, but also their Ratchet and Clank series. A lot of people describe as not missing a beat. I mean, there's not a single bad game in the series.
Yeah, they're
which
so fun.
I think can't be said for Spyro. There are some pretty bad ones, or mediocre ones, which we'll talk about. Now, the remaster, the Reignited Trilogy, was done by Toys for Bob. Interestingly enough, they are known for the Star Control series and the Skylanders series, which was one of the iterations of Spyro, which I kind of was not a fan of that whole thing. I mean, I never got into the Skylanders. It kind of just seemed like a kid thing. I know Spyro was in it, but he was just one supporting character. I was just kind of not happy that Spyro was just relegated to being, just one part of a franchise and not being his own star. But I mean, at that time, I mean, that's just kind of what was going on. But at least they're aware of the character and they've worked with the character in the past. I can't say anything bad about how he's been treated in this game. One thing that Toys for Bob also did was the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, or at least the Switch port of it. I think Activision was actually behind the Insane Trilogy, but Toys for Bob did the Switch port. And Toys for Bob is going to be involved with Crash Bandicoot 4.
Yeah. Yeah,
it's about time. Other studios that helped develop the Spyro Reignited Trilogy include Sanzaru Games, who were in charge of the Year of the Dragon remaster, and then Iron Galaxy, who took over the PC port. But I remember that there was quite a popular demand for a Spyro remastered trilogy right after the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy came out, because those two characters have always been linked.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of memories of playing one and then going to the other, and it's like, well, I have one.
Yeah, exactly. And what's interesting is both series kind of took the same turns. 3 games that were great, and then are kind of regarded as a holy trilogy, and then kind of a few misbeats, and then a reboot or two in there, and and then now a return to fame. With just remastering, and now with the direction that the Crash series is going in, with producing a game, developing a game, which is now going to be Crash Bandicoot 4 after the trilogy, and kind of going back to roots, I think is really a good step, because if that's what's going to happen with Spyro, I mean, we're probably in line for a new good Spyro game. and that's exciting. One thing I do want to mention is that unlike the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, this the Reignited Trilogy was actually a collaborative effort between Toys for Bob and Insomniac Games. So Insomniac was still involved in the development of this game. Now, one key goal, as noted by art director Josh Nadelberg, was to get Spyro right. One thing that was done with his model was that he was put through rigorous stress tests to explore a range of emotions and expressions. And I really felt like they did a good job with modernizing the character and being able to fully explore his personality in a way that the PS1 games couldn't, right?
Yeah,
he's
exactly.
just more animated.
Yeah, no, it's definitely weird seeing like Spyro with different emotions, because like when you're a kid, like it's only one little thing and there's not even really like cutscenes, and like as a kid you didn't know, that games could be as good as they are now. Of course, like none of us could see into the future, but like even just a little bit we have, we were like, oh wow, he's so cool looking. Now you're like,
that
bro,
was like shit. And now it's like, whoa.
And you see the trilogy and you're like, bro, he has facial expressions.
No, yeah, he has a full range of emotion, and he really has a lot of personality. And I really liked that. I think that Toys for Bob was able to provide what I believe was Insomniac Games' vision. Just they didn't have the technology at the time, and I'm really impressed by how well modernized the games are and how well the gameplay still stands up. I mean, and one quirk of playing old games is that sometimes the controls are sticky and it's hard to maneuver, and there's glitches and bugs, and all of that's been moved past, and it really does feel like with all the content in this game. I mean, this game feels, these games I should say, feels pretty modern. I mean,
yeah, and it's kind of cool to watch like the new generation of children play what we played as kids. Like a lot of the original children that played this are parents now, and it's like, hey, you want to play a game I played? And it's like, you don't have to play it on my PlayStation 1. I can play it on my PlayStation 4.
Well, exactly. I mean,
it's
who
really
still
cool.
has a PlayStation 1? Not a lot of people.
Yeah.
And eventually those consoles are just going to stop working. I mean, I know they recently did the PlayStation Classic, which is good, and we've got ports, but I don't think there's movies and video games studios get a lot of flack. There's a lot of criticism for remakes and reboots and remasters, and I don't see an issue with that at all. What's wrong with bringing something that's tried and true, taking something that is commercially successful and critically successful, and bringing it to a new generation?
Exactly. You want to keep that gaming, I wouldn't say culture, but history alive. Like you want to be able to be like, hey, pass it down like, hey, this is what I played as a kid. I want you to enjoy how I enjoyed it.
And there are plenty of new games. I mean, it's not like it's taking away from the bank of available new ideas. And if anything, a remaster like this, which is completely faithful to the original, I think does go over a lot better. One thing that was actually interesting, though, was that Insomniac wasn't able to provide the source code. So Toys for Bob had to use an in-house emulation tool, which they called Spyroscope. So, I mean, essentially, I guess this game was pretty much built from the ground up.
Yeah. They couldn't recover anything from the old engines because it's like...
It wasn't compatible.
Yeah, even the dialogue was re-recorded after 20 years. So all of the characters are, even if they're voiced by the same voice actors, some of them are, some of them aren't. All of it was actually re-recorded, including Spyro's voice. Now, the original composer of the trilogy, Stuart Copeland, we'll have more to talk about him in a minute, but he's actually the drummer for The Police. He did the score for the original games. He only came back to write the new main theme and didn't write any other new tracks, but I'm really happy with what they did with his old tracks in the game.
Yeah. It's kind of like the new Doom.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same songs, but they've been redone, and then there's new additions, and there's some cool aspects of it, like when Spyro's running, there's kind of like a galloping, and when he's at a standstill, it kind of calms down a little bit, and you can actually toggle between the original music and the Reignited tracks in-game, by the way. So for people that don't want to listen to the new ones and prefer, that nostalgic value, that's still there. But I guess we'll kind of go over the series history a little bit. here before we get into, each individual game. But I mean, what is Alan and Megan, like what is y'all's history with the series?
I don't really have much of it. This wasn't a game that we had friends that had it, but we never played it. But I know him and his brother played it a lot.
Me and my brother played this game religiously. I don't remember getting too much into the second or third, but I remember playing the first one a lot. And I mean, on the PlayStation 1, and it was just something, family, me and my brother would go and play. And my dad grew up on older stuff, but it was still kind of to where he can get into it. So when we couldn't catch those damn egg thieves, it'd be like, controller, Dad, and he's like, okay, let me see if I can do this. But it was a little bit harder back then for the controlling of the angles and everything. And PlayStation 1, they didn't have the analog joysticks. It was just the D-pad. And it was just, I mean, from what I can remember, when did it come out? 90?
Yeah, it's in the 90s through the 2000s. I know.
Yeah. Like mid to late 2000s. Or,
yeah. I mean, I know. Whatchamacallit? Spyro 2 was in 1999. Year of the Dragon was 2000. I can't remember when the original came out. Well,
I think it was 97.
97. Okay. No, but yeah, the original PlayStation trilogy was exclusively on the PlayStation. Spyro the Dragon, Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage, and Spyro Year of the Dragon. These are the most fondly remembered games in the franchise. I didn't really get a lot of experience with them either. I kind of came into the series later. The game I started with was A Hero's Tale. That's pretty much the Spyro game that introduced me to the franchise, and that I remember playing that on the GameCube. But yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with the original PlayStation trilogy. I was aware of it. I think I've seen people play it. And now, like I do feel like I kind of missed out. But I didn't have a PlayStation growing up. My first console was a GameCube. But one thing I know is that like you were saying, the games originally, you had to play with the D-pad. I think there was a controller that came out for the PlayStation that had the analog stick, if I'm not mistaken.
It was later.
In this game, like 2 or 3 years later after the initial console release, I believe. I don't know. But it was something. It seemed like a long time back then.
And these games, I think, could still be played with the analog stick once you got that later. But originally, I mean, you had the D-pad, and with Spyro's movements, I imagine that could have been kind of difficult.
Yeah.
But I mean, after the original PlayStation trilogy, we had Season of Ice and Season of Flame. Those were portable games, I believe, on the Game Boy Advance. And then there was the infamous Enter the Dragonfly. Is Spyro 4 for consoles, but was very poorly received just due to short length, just not nearly as much content, and the game being extremely buggy and glitchy. There was also, of course, more, I think, portable games, Attack of the Rhinox, and then Spyro Orange, Cortex Conspiracy, which was a crossover with Crash Bandicoot. There was Crash Purple and Spyro Orange. And then A Hero's Tale on the GameCube, which I've heard. I mean, I liked it as a kid. I would need to revisit it to have a second opinion, but I thought it was great. I mean, I played through the entire game. It was one of the very first games I had on the GameCube. I fell in love with it. It was, I think at the time, my favorite game before I was introduced to Zelda, before I had the Wind Waker. But but no, I was really, really into it. But I think the game was perceived as more catering towards children. And I mean, don't get me wrong, Spyro has always been family friendly, but even adults can play kind of the original trilogy. But a lot of like the jokes and the humor and the tone of, the later games are just a little too childish. I've also heard that it isn't quite reached the same tone. But I did like how Spyro had more fluid movements. He could double jump and glide.
Yeah.
And things like that. And then, of course, after that, there was the Shadow Legacy. I played that one as well on the DS. That was actually a pretty fun game. I think it actually has been pretty well received, if I'm not mistaken. After that, they had the Legend of Spyro Reboot Trilogy.
I remember hearing about that.
Yeah,
as a kid.
I didn't play them, but I was aware of them. Actually, I played the handheld versions. This was during the time when games came out and they had both a console and a portable version. And I remember played the portables, but I never played the console ones. There was A New Beginning, Eternal Night, and Dawn of the Dragon, which kind of were more combat oriented, and they were actually pretty poorly received, or at best, mixed reviews. Just because it's like they were going for a gritty, realistic version of Spyro. Kind of like more of like an epic version, and it just doesn't work. That's not what the original games were, and I don't know why they ended up making 3 of them is beyond me. I haven't played them, but I did kind of watch some reviews, and I mean they seem pretty abysmal. And just a game that started out as a more of a platforming game and exploration being relegated to more combat based just seems like a downgrade to me. And apparently there's just a lot of combat. And then of course after that, Spyro was relegated to a side character. I mean, he was essentially just one of many, starting with Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, which originally was going to be called Spyro's Kingdom. And I think Spyro was not going to be playable, but like it was going to be like his own kingdom. Maybe it was like an older Spyro. And then eventually that became Skylanders. I think just because the series was just so poorly received at this point, developers kind of just gave up on it. But thankfully, we did get now Spyro Reignited Trilogy. There's a lot of hope now for more Spyro games.
I think I smell a barbecue. Looks like I've got some things to do. Hold your horns. This is great. Wow.
Thank you for releasing me.
Hello.
Who are you again? Spyro. 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 I'm getting a little winded.
That's me, all right.
We're going to actually get into it now, starting with Spyro the Dragon. What did you guys think about the first game?
Oh, it jumped me right back into like being a kid. I remember like going over to friends' houses to play this game, and it was just so fun. Especially just like like it's been such a stressful time for everybody out there, and just to be able to play a game that was originally designed for children. It's a very simple game. I know this game, for like a lot of kids, it created the completionist gamers that we have now that are like, I have to get 100%. And it was so fun for me. It was kind of a refreshing bit to be able to play a game that was more simple, childish kind of thing, like more of a...
Gives you that nostalgic feeling of playing the game back then and just thinking about being a kid and not really worrying. The world had a lot less troubles. I mean, it had its own troubles, but it wasn't as...
We weren't aware of them.
Yeah, and that's ignorance is bliss. But anyway, if you're a kid, you don't have any responsibilities, and that's what I like. You just sit there and play the game, and Mom, I want more chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, please.
Yeah.
Or a hot dog, whatever.
Of the three, I mean, this one does feel, I think, the most nostalgic. It does also feel the most dated, I will say. But there is a certain charm to it that is kind of unique, I think. I want to say that there's a charm to the first game that doesn't quite make it into the other two. They're I think they're better games, but they're different. In a way, it's almost, for me, it's kind of similar to the Batman Arkham series, in that Arkham Asylum is not as good of a game as Arkham City or Arkham Knight, but damn, it just has such a cool tone that the other ones don't have. And I kind of felt that to a much lesser degree here, but there is a certain tone to Spyro the Dragon that I think is a little bit different. And I think even some of the more technical aspects that were added in the later two games in the remaster here weren't added, like the hover and swimming. I mean, the game was kind of left intact as it is, I think, because by adding some of those abilities, it would make it more, I think there would be a lot of sequence breaking and
Yeah.
But Spyro the Dragon was an open-ended 3D platformer, kind of one of the pioneers, I think, of the genre. I mean, if you can compare it to games of the same era, like Super Mario 64 or...
Yeah.
Crash Bandicoot.
Yeah, Crash Bandicoot.
Donkey Kong.
I think there was something interesting about Spyro, though, that set it apart, was just Spyro's movement. I mean, he's a quadruped, and he can fly. Well, he doesn't fly, he glides, aside from some levels. There was just kind of this aspect of being able to, glide across the map, and there was this sense of exploration. There are 6 hub-style dragon homeworlds: the Artisans, Peacekeepers, Magic Crafters, Beast Tamers, and Dreamweavers. They all have their own feeling, especially with the, I guess just say, the life that's been breathed into them through the Reignited Trilogy. They all have different feels and different characters and enemies, and they all kind of feel different.
Mm-hmm.
And each homeworld also consists of portals to levels. I thought that each level, kind of in its own way, also felt very unique. Although they did stick to the themes of their homeworlds, each level managed to have its own aura, you know what I mean? Its own tone. And I thought that was interesting. I mean, how did you guys feel going through each of the worlds and each of the levels?
I think it was a lot of fun. I liked how there was, I wouldn't say puzzles, because for me puzzles are a little bit more, I guess, like challenges. I really like that concept of being able to have a little bit of a challenge to be able to get to this part, and then you have to kind of rewind, and that does kind of portray on into the later games. Of course, like you go back and you get an egg kind of thing, same thing from the third game. I really liked how there was a different part for every game, and also just like I said earlier, like that's the one thing I love about the Spyro trilogy itself, even just the Reignited trilogy, is just the simplicity of it. I didn't have to rack my brain to be able to figure out, okay, now I gotta fly over here so I can glide here. It was just so much simpler for me. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely brought back the completionist in me.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I didn't get all the gems in this level. I have to restart it all and figure out where I messed up. And it was fun. Each level definitely had its own feel. I liked the different variations and all the different challenges. And I think her puzzles, though, I think the closest would be getting those the egg thieves.
Oh, I hate those.
Yeah.
I hate those almost as much as money bags.
Fuck money bags. Honestly, fuck money bags.
Yeah.
It was ridiculous.
But yeah, no, I kind of agree with you guys. The puzzle solving in the first game is a little bare bones considered. I think the first game was just more exploration based. But there was something about it that was new, that was different, that kind of drew people in. And I think despite the technical limitations at the time, the game really does shine through, and that core gameplay that makes its way into the sequels, which I think improved upon the first game in every way. But the first game does still have its own feel, its own distinct tone, and I do like the way that the levels are kind of organized according to theme. I do like the simplicity of it. There were times when I kind of was like, hey, I want to go back and play Spyro the Dragon. I just, and I think it was the most fun to 100% as well. I mean, the gameplay was pretty simple. I mean, it just consists of exploration and collection. Your main goal is to rescue crystallized dragons. The side goal is to collect all treasure, all the gems. And then, like you said, there's the stolen dragon eggs, which, are obtained by chasing and defeating thieves. But one thing that's cool about this is that finding every collectible unlocks a hidden world. I haven't actually played yet, but
Like the dragon statue collectibles?
everything.
Like all the everything.
Oh, all
like
the
once you
gems, all the
100%
eggs.
that game.
Oh.
Yeah. One thing that has been added to this game, I know, and in the remaster, was the skill points. That was something new. So there was also something extra to do in every single level if you were going for 100% completion. Just kind of what were more like achievements or trophies. Just, find this hidden flower or do, defeat this boss without taking any damage or things like that. But beyond that, I mean, the original game has been kept intact. And I was actually thoroughly impressed by how well this remaster stays faithful to the original, even, the limitations. Even the fact that it kind of is more constrained than the other two, and not bringing in, the abilities that I probably would break the game, but bringing in some quality of life improvements and like Sparks being able to point out treasure. That's good. Did y'all know about that? Because I didn't know about that until later. Sparks can point out treasure. If you're going for 100% completion, it's necessary. But if you click the analog stick, Sparks will point treasure out.
What?
Yeah, that was an aspect that was in 2 and 3, but not in this one. But I guess what was unique about Spyro, as compared to other open-ended 3D platformers at the time, was, I guess the combat and Spyro's method of platforming. I mean, as far as the combat goes, Spyro can charge and he can use flame attack. There were enemies with fireproof metal armor that have to be charged, and there's large enemies that have to be hit with the fire breath.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them you'd punt off of a freaking cliff.
Yeah.
Oh my God, yes, punting enemies off cliffs. I mean, like we talked about in our Star Wars episode. I mean, that's just there's nothing that's.
Yeah.
She finds a way to do it every time in every single game.
Just
People off.
I love yeeting people. It's great.
Just yeet them off the edge. As far as platforming goes, I mean, Spyro can jump onto platforms and he can glide to reach faraway platforms, and that in and of itself, kind of creates this unique gameplay. Now, being a dragon, you would expect Spyro to be able to fly, but he just kind of jumps and he glides, and it's a very, for me, it's a very satisfying feeling. Every single time you do it, every single time you pull it off, and you just barely reach that faraway platform. Something else that was unique about Spyro was the concept of using Sparks the Dragonfly as a health gauge. I mean, when Sparks takes a hit, he goes from golden to blue to green, and then he disappears, and then you eat butterflies.
Yeah.
I have to wrap my head around this. Spyro kills fodder like sheep and other small animals or creatures, and then they become butterflies, and then Sparks eats them. I don't really get it either, but that's how it goes. There are also power-ups like the Supercharge and the Super Flame. I think in the first game it was just those two. But, like I said, all of these things considered, it was considered, even at the time, just very unique to other 3D platform games. In my opinion, I think Spyro the Dragon had the most difficult gameplay out of the three. You agree?
Yeah, no, it was definitely the most difficult.
Maybe not intentionally, but I think because of the slightly less refined controls and level design, it does have a difficulty to it that, it sometimes makes you kind of want to pull out your hair. But at the same time, I think that the 3 games overall were good at not being too frustrating. Challenging, but not too frustrating. And I think that's what gives them character. And I think that's what gives Spyro the Dragon character. As far as the story goes, again, it's kind of bare bones, right? I mean, the other games kind of do delve more into that. But the series as a whole isn't heavily story-based. I think that's where Legend of Spyro Trilogy went wrong. But as far as the story goes, I mean, it's pretty simple. You've got Nasty Nork, who loses his temper and decides to encase all the dragons in crystal and steals their treasure. You've got the young dragon Spyro, who somehow manages to evade that, and he sets out to free the dragons, defeat Nork. He visits each dragon homeworld. He defeats the forces and, rescuing dragons, collecting treasure on the way. And then apparently there is a secret ending that can be unlocked by collecting everything.
Well, I think we didn't get 100%, so I kind of wish we could have seen that.
I'm pretty sure some kind of like grand screen thing would appear if we got it. Probably.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that was in common with all of the games was that there is kind of a reward for getting 100% completion, which is good, more so than just doing the thing. I mean, there's going to be an unlockable endings and things and extra worlds, and so that's really interesting. There's not much more to say about the story, I don't think. I mean, just that it's there.
I mean, yeah, the story itself.
It's very simple.
It's very linear and just progressive, and it's just like, okay, next boss. Okay, next boss. But I mean, one thing I did hate that I did remember doing in the original one from PlayStation 1 was those timed aerial challenges where you're just like gliding around and you have to go up
the
and
flight
down
levels,
collect all these things. I've always hated that. Even when I was a kid, I could never do it. I'd hand the controller over to my brother, and he would maybe first or second try he'd collect everything. And he's like, "All right, what? You couldn't do that?" I'm like, "No." Just frustrated. I still can't do them. I'm like, how does he? How?
They're hard. It took me a long time too. Like when I was playing through this, I didn't get it at first, but in the later games, which the flight levels later became known as the speedway challenges, there is a method to it. You just have to collect the items one at a time. You start with one, and then you go to the other, and then you go to the other, and so you just kind of have to figure out the strategy. But the objectives are laid out in front of you in a way that you can go from one to the other to the other to the other, but it is hard, and don't get me wrong, like the first game being thrust into that, but they are the only parts in the game where Spyro actually flies, other than the loading screens.
You miss one thing, that you're not going to get that extra boost of 10 or 15 seconds to circle back around and get it, and you just got to move on to the next little subcategory or whatever you got to collect there. So you got to nail everything perfect first try in order to just
all in one.
Get it all.
And it is kind of difficult, but I did like the flight stages, which every homeworld contains one and a boss fight. One thing I have heard is that and I have to agree, is the boss fights are criticized in the first Spyro game as just being very simple and too easy. I mean, there's just not a lot to them. Every boss basically consists of, okay, attack the boss, and then they run away, and then you go attack them again. And in particular, Nasty Nork is kind of anticlimactic. I mean, you get to him, and then you just chase him, and that's it.
Yeah, it reminds me a lot of the in the temples, like in the Zelda games, like with the mini bosses where it's just repetition. It's like hit, dodge, hit, dodge, hit, dodge. Like it reminded me a lot of that. Which I mean, it's of the time period, so it makes sense. But like now, it's like, damn.
Yeah, no, definitely. But,
yeah, no. Now we're like, bro, it took me 2 hours to fight that boss.
But I mean, while the gameplay and the story are kind of just bare bones compared to the other games, I mean, they still do. I mean, there is still a charm to this game. And what I think is just really interesting more than any of that is just the development. I mean, one thing about Spyro the Dragon is that it's one of the first PlayStation games to utilize shifting levels of detail on rendered objects. It was the second game ever developed by Insomniac following Disruptor, which was a commercial failure, but received enough positive critical reception to impress Universal Interactive Studios, now known as Vivendi Games. Well, now they don't exist, but and then Spyro came along and was extremely critically and commercially successful. But what's interesting is that initially, apparently, the tone was going to be darker and more realistic, being inspired by the movie Dragonheart.
I don't know that movie. I've never seen
I've
that.
seen bits and pieces of it, but I mean, that was kind of what they were going for, but then the producer, Mark Cerny, was the one that advised a mass market appeal in order to compete with the Nintendo 64, who had a selection of children's titles that greatly outnumbered the PlayStation. And I mean, look at the result. I'm happier that the series went in that direction. Another thing, it was originally Spyro was named Pete, but evidently that was too similar to another dragon, or I guess not the dragon, but Pete's dragon. So they changed the name to Pyro.
Mm-hmm.
They thought that was too mature, so they changed it to Spyro. So there you go. The Pyro in Spyro does actually mean, has to do with fire. I never made that connection.
Yeah.
No, I didn't either. I thought something because of like the way he runs or something. I never knew. I was like, that's really
I never thought
neat.
about it.
Cool.
Apparently, he was also originally colored green, but the
Yeah.
developers changed his appearance to purple so he wouldn't blend in with the grass.
That makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah, that was kind of cool. One thing that, and I mentioned this earlier, but Insomniac had a close relationship with the Crash Bandicoot creator, Naughty Dog, whose office was located directly across the hall. The two developers frequently worked together, and they played early builds of each other's games, and then later sharing technology as well. But what's interesting is there's actually a hidden demo of Crash Bandicoot Warped, the third Crash game, in Spyro, and vice versa. Spyro the Dragon is in Crash Bandicoot Warped as a demo.
Huh.
Yeah, I think it's accessed through the title screen or something, but I thought that was interesting. But the ability to glide and cross entire levels from a high enough point did make designing levels difficult, because obviously you could just skip past things if they didn't design the level right. But it also meant that levels could be more open-ended and explorative. And I mean, I think the end result speaks for itself, right?
Yeah,
One thing
exactly.
that was interesting was that there was a NASA engineer who specialized in flight controls who was brought on to help with programming camera movement and Spyro's movement controls.
Yeah, I think you had told me about that whenever we were about to start playing this game.
That probably ties into not having analog sticks, one look and one move. You only have a D-pad to look, move, navigate.
Yeah, which was what made the game so much more difficult, probably, and probably why it feels so much easier now.
Yeah, I had to have that engineer come in and mechanic, build the software for that.
I think that's what makes it so much more. It feels more simple now because you can actually move the camera. You can actually be like, hey, I can look over there and there's the XD from there.
I can look over there without moving my character and accidentally falling off the edge.
Nice.
No, exactly. One thing too originally was that and then that kind of ties into what you guys are saying, but initially the camera would directly follow Spyro, and it was changed to the more steady kind of over the shoulder because it had a nauseating effect with Spyro's high speed movements on like early test players.
Oh, like in the dashing and stuff. Ooh, God.
Well, I remember like playing it on PlayStation 1, obviously with the D-pad and trying to, like you're running in a circle trying to catch the egg thief, and you can't like turn the camera to look into where you're going. So if you change your angle slightly around the same corner and you come back around and you forgot to change it back just a little bit, you're going to run right off the edge and start all
that
over.
can happen. And sometimes I know I had the action camera set on the later games instead of the passive one, and sometimes it was useful, but other times it kind of it did make things difficult, and I would run off the edge by accident. One thing I heard was that the motion blur in the game, in the Reignited Trilogy, is actually one of the few criticisms, is that there's a lot of motion blur, and it did kind of make people a little bit sick with the Spyro's high-speed movements. I didn't experience that as much because I played the Switch version, which I think was more refined, and I think the later versions were patched. Also because I was playing in handheld mode, because I have a Switch Lite. Handheld mode doesn't have the motion blur. That's a setting that's only on the TV mode. But they did it actually to kind of to handle the frame drops. That was why the motion blur was added. But I've heard actually that the motion blur. I've heard from quite a few reviewers and other people that the motion blur was not a good move on Toys for Bob's part. It just makes you more sick while playing the game, and so it's good that at least in the Switch version you can turn that off. And I didn't really notice the frame drops, so I think a lot of that was patched. Yeah.
I didn't either. And we played on the Xbox.
You played the Xbox One version?
Yeah, well, we debated for a while because I have both. I have the Xbox and the PlayStation, so I was like, do I want to play it on the PlayStation or do I want to try it out on an Xbox just to see if there's a difference? So we bought it on the Xbox, and it felt like a really good game. I didn't have any issues with it at all.
The way the Xbox controller fits in my hand better than the PlayStation. The PlayStation feels... I love both consoles, but the controller itself just fits better.
Yeah, the PlayStation controller is longer because of the... What do they call it?
The touch bar?
No, the pad, the touchpad. It feels longer and more elongated as most PlayStation controllers do because it's the D-pad is so long. Not the D-pad, the touchpad is so long.
Yeah.
Well, in some games it operates as a D-pad.
I will say I'm more of a PlayStation gamer, but the Xbox controller does feel a lot more comfortable. I got to give Xbox credit on that. But one thing that was interesting about the original Spyro game, around 80% of the code was written in assembly and other parts in C for simplicity and speed. But writing in assembly sounds really difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, assembly language is basically more, I mean, for people that don't know much about computer programming or computer science, assembly language is actually one of the more basic rudimentary game or programming languages. It's much closer to the actual, the way that the computer speaks. I mean, computers speak in binary.
Binary, very close to binary.
What's that?
Code. I would say it's very close to binary.
Yeah, it's much closer to the original binary. I think assembly is pretty much just the step up from that. And it's more corresponds with the instructions in the language and the architecture's machine code instructions. But to write a game in assembly, I mean, honestly, I mean, I don't see how it could be done, but let me see. Oh, I just looked it up. So the original Spyro was released in North America in 1998. So the three games were successive, 98, 99, and 2000, interestingly enough.
Nice.
Yeah. But I did want to touch on Stuart Copeland. Again, as we said earlier, the drummer for The Police. He did the compositions for actually all three games. But he was given early builds of the game and with cheats enabled so that he could get a feel for and come up with a fitting composition. Each song was written to correspond to a specific level, actually, although ultimately they didn't actually use it that way. But Copeland himself says that he feels that this was some of his best work. And the soundtrack, I mean, it's really actually something.
Yeah, no, it's I don't want to like call it like, I don't know. To me, like Spyro is a cute character, but it's like a cute, airy work of like composure compared to like, you know, very intensive games like The Last of Us, for example, with Gustavo Santaolalla, or is it Santaolalla? I can't remember. Santaolalla, I think. And then of course, you know, like the Mass Effect, also with like the God of War series, like they're all very like deep and dark, and then you get Spyro and it's like and you're just like, oh, okay, that's cool.
You just triggered memory bank one for me when you said airy. I remember I had it was like, like the outline of Spyro on a piece of paper, like printed, and it reminded me of me using blow pens to color it in. You remember blow pens?
Oh my God, the ones where you had the little cone on it?
Yeah, I was on Spyro with it.
Oh my God.
Kind of does have that feel, right?
Wow.
That's funny. Yeah. But as far as the voice work goes, what's interesting is that originally Carlos Alazraqui did the voice of Spyro, although he would be later replaced by Tom Kenny in both the Spyro sequels and in the Reignited Trilogy. They re-recorded with Tom Kenny's lines, I guess for a sense of consistency. But Alazraqui, if you hear some of the original voice clips, I mean, he does kind of have his own spin on the character, and by no means is that voice work bad on his part.
Yeah.
I guess kind of wrapping up here on Spyro the Dragon, it does currently hold a 85% on game rankings, regarded by many as one of the most fun 3D platformers at the time even. Critics lauded the presentation, especially graphics, technical performance, Copeland's soundtrack. There was a lot of praise for the level design and controls. Their work was criticism directed at the lack of diversity in abilities and obstacles. I know the boss fights in particular have been criticized. But what did you guys think about, just the overall graphics and the execution and the presentation, especially in the Reignited Trilogy version?
I think they fucking nailed it.
Mm-hmm. I haven't personally seen any Crash Bandicoot. I know one of my nearest and dearest friends has it, and he's played it, and he loves it. But, it's kind of, similar, in that way to the Crash Bandicoot. I think they just brought a new life to it. The gameplay and the graphics for me are really cool, very vivid. It's almost like its own sense of nostalgia in a colorful way.
And even the original games were colorful and vivid, but they were very just bare, especially the first game.
Yeah. Well, thinking on the 4K TV, it's like the colors like jumping at you. You're like, whoa, am I tripping on acid? Like, it's insanity.
This game would be fun on acid. Oh, no. Oh my God, I did play this game on acid. I forgot. No, I did. It was actually surprisingly easier to play than some other like just really heavy games. So I guess that's a good thing. This game is easy to play when you're on drugs if you're tripping.
So don't do drugs, guys.
Yeah, don't do drugs. Yeah, don't do them. But I really like how much detail was added. I mean, you've got the individual blades of grass which blow in the wind. You've got Spyro's tail. His body movements are more fluid, and like we said before, he's got more expressions. A lot of the characters in the game, especially in the first one, who are just regular like dragons and not a lot of diversity, now they all do fit the motif of the area that you're in. So you have the dragons that look like artisans or magic crafters, and they all kind of have their own personalities now, in a sense. And even for the short, like 3 seconds that they pop up and say their useless phrase. But some of it really is useless.
Don't forget that you can learn to fly. Really?
I don't think I could have gotten here if I.
You're the fifth dragon that told me that.
Yeah, I know some of the dialogue is just laughable, and it really does show its age. But it's I love that most of the lines of dialogue were kept intact. Something that's interesting is in the original, a lot of the dragons actually I think had the same lines, so they actually fixed that. Like I said, all the dialogue was re-recorded, so. A lot of the dragons do have before repeated script actually have their own lines of dialogue now. But I guess moving on to Ripto's Rage, I mean, just overall impressions. What did you guys think?
I mean, it's a continuation of it, of course. Kind of like how you were talking about in our last podcast episode with Lara Croft. Kind of, just a continuation of it. It's not really much different, but there is some little, added additions. Of course, things like having to buy ability.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I like the new abilities, but you got to buy them.
Because money bags is a money hoe.
Fuck money bags. That's going to be like our catchphrase here. Fuck money bags.
Harry! Boy, fuck money bags.
There's going to be like a cumulative phrase from each one. That could be our next intro.
I like that idea. Yeah, like you said, Megan, I mean, it is mostly similar to its predecessor, although I think Ripto's Rage improves by leaps and bounds. I mean, introducing the hover mechanic, swimming, which was just completely absent in the first game. I mean, Spyro just drowned if he swam. No explanation why. I mean, I guess...
Yeah.
I mean...
Spyro is secretly the Wicked Witch.
Yeah, swimming was one of the new abilities, along with climbing and head bashing. Like you said, we're all there. These are all taught by Moneybags for a fee. And he also, requires Spyro to pay gems to progress in certain areas, which was kind of annoying. But at the same time, it means that gems or treasure actually has a purpose in this game, as opposed to the last one where, treasure was just kind of for the sake of collecting it and for getting the last level. In this game, I mean, gems actually do act as a currency, which is good. By the way, I mean, did you guys catch on to that? Because, I mean, I remember when it suddenly connected for me. Spyro collects gems. He collects treasure because he's a dragon. And dragons hoard treasure.
Yeah, he's a dragon. And they guard it for no reason.
Yep. It's a dragon game through and through. I mean, he's just a regular Smog, but, small and purple, and not with Benedict Cumberbatch's lovely, gravelly voice. But yeah, I like also the power-ups. There's a lot more of them, and now each level actually has a power-up gate, which you activate by defeating a certain number of enemies, and it looks like their souls come out of their bodies and power it up. Orbs, spirit orbs, and I don't know what it is, but...
Yeah, it's a lot different than just continuing to go through the home world, and it's like, I don't like you. You're attacking me. I'm going to kill you. Now there's a purpose for enemies, too, other than the sake of getting a laugh.
Exactly. I think in the other games, I mean, it's. I think you defeat enemies for the sake of collecting the gems, so you can get 100% gem collection in the level. But they actually don't drop gems in this one. They drop their souls, which power gates. I will say, okay, and especially you can tell in this game, because some of the levels are just batshit crazy, okay? The Insomniac Games were doing some drugs, I'm telling you. They were on something.
Yeah, no, they're kind of weird. I'm like, okay.
Those are just so zany. And especially what I like about this one is that every level has, and just this one in Ripto's Rage, has that beginning cutscene and end cutscene introducing a new species of character. So you've got like the monks who like levitate and objects and I like that you play both sides in a war. At what there's like the birds versus like the blobby guys, and you actually play both sides. So Spyro's just like fuck everyone. He just kills everyone on both sides, I guess. There's different levels where you play on both sides, killing enemies from the other side. But yeah, no, I liked a lot of the power-ups. I mean, you've got abilities like invulnerability, flight, supercharge, and super flame, return, ice breath, and super jump. And you've got those that each level containing the collectible orbs, and which are earned through NPC side quests. Or later on completing the level. I mean, I liked how the orbs kind of become a main collectible in this game. Although in the early levels, it was the talismans and the orbs. And then in like the last home world, it's the orbs.
Yeah.
Which I actually had to go back through. One thing I will say that kind of broke the flow of the game for me in a sense.
All right, well, sorry me for cutting you off mid-sentence, but due to some technical difficulties and difficulties in our personal lives, we've decided to split this podcast into 2 parts. But don't worry, that means you'll get more content. I mean, we've already gone on for an hour in this episode, and we'll go on for an hour plus in the second part. So I've gone ahead and cut it off here. We're going to resume right where we picked up, talking about Spyro 2, Ripto's Rage. Look forward to that. I should have that out, actually, not too long after I release this episode. By next week, hopefully as early as possible. But I'm going to go ahead and upload this portion of the episode now. What's also cool is that it allows us to kind of experiment with this format. Starting next season, we actually are going to be splitting our episodes into 2 parts, an hour each, and releasing those bi-weekly. So by trying that with Spyro Reignited Trilogy, which again is 3 games, so definitely it's a game worth splitting up into 2 just to be able to discuss all of the content. Hopefully we can kind of give that a test run and see how that goes. So stay tuned for part 2 of Spyro Reignited Trilogy. We'll see you guys then. Collateral Gaming is an L Company production. All music and game clips are owned by their respective creators and are used for educational purposes only. Please don't sue us. We're poor.
Money, how?
Fuck money bags.